Okay, welcome to the Downtown Den for our latest event. I'm delighted today to be joined by Philip Cox. Philip is the Chief Executive of the Cheshire and Warrington Local Enterprise Partnership. Welcome, Philip.
Thank you. Delighted to be here. I'm
Yeah,
sure we're in the den. Perhaps you're in the den. I'm gonna like everyone else stuck at home. Yeah, I'd rather be in the den.
it's the virtual den, Philip. That's what it is. And I've enjoyed our time in it, I can tell you. This is where we're all getting used to this virtual world, and we've done over 100 of these video interviews now, which has been an interesting experience, as you can imagine.
Yes.
I mentioned to you offline, we had Claire, your chair, doing an event with us last week. Some very interesting comments and issues that she raised. But I just wanted to start our conversation really with the challenges that nobody could have anticipated prior to March, and what sort of things local enterprise partnerships, yourselves in particular, are starting to think about as we hopefully enter a more positive period.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's worth just kind of underlining and maybe just putting some numbers around the scale of the challenge. I mean, before lockdown or before COVID struck, kind of Cheshire and Warrington was about a £32 billion a year economy. It's not been disproportionately affected compared to anywhere else, but that still means that we're probably looking at anything between a £3 billion and £4.5 billion reduction in the size of the economy. £4.5 billion, that's got to come out of somebody's pocket, and it's going to hurt somewhere, and we're really going to notice it. The other thing it's undoubtedly going to do is it's going to increase our level of unemployment. Probably about, we think, we don't know for certain, potentially 60,000 additional unemployed people just in Cheshire and Warrington. Now that's really important because, unlike most of the rest of the north and northwest, Cheshire and Warrington has been in this really, really fortunate position of genuinely having more jobs in its area than we've got people of working age. So unemployment, and we have had unemployment, but it's been a sort of a complex dependency kind of characteristic. You were unemployed because you had a number of other complex problems, and it was already a sort of a social problem. What we're going to have now is just lack of jobs. Many people who've kind of worked for the whole of their working lives, well qualified, well trained, but just the COVID has hit their business, and it just doesn't, they've lost their job. And therefore, number one target for Cheshire and Warrington will be to get those jobs back. Actually, what Cheshire and Warrington is going to have to do is it's going to have to learn what actually most of the North already knows about doing, because where there have been kind of areas like Tees Valley, sort of the northeast, sort of parts of Liverpool, some parts of Manchester are who always look to bring jobs into their own. We're going to have to learn from some of those and sort of get into that game as well. Several people have commented. I'm sure they have done in across the rest of the northwest and elsewhere, that it's a disappointing person who doesn't kind of make the best of a crisis, and partly as a consequence of having a new chair, and new chairs always like to do as new chairs should, just stand back a little bit and think about the objectives of their organisation. We had begun to do that already as the crisis was beginning to strike, and crisis has given us renewed emphasis and impetus to do that. And what our board has concluded is that we do want to offer a better future for Cheshire. We don't just want to recreate the place that we had, and I'll come back to in a minute about kind of even whether that's achievable, but we don't just want to recreate what we have already. We want to create a better place, and that better place is, we are saying, it's the healthiest, it's the most sustainable, it's the most inclusive, It's the fastest growing economy in the UK. And whilst I should imagine some of our viewers will sort of think, well, doesn't everywhere want to be that? The great thing about Cheshire and Warrington is we've been in an extraordinarily fortunate position of having consistently been the second fastest growing place in the UK. So just getting to the top of that league table, as Liverpool managed this season, sort of feel like hopefully won't take us 20 years or whatever it was to achieve that. That's a less demanding ask than it might at first sound. Sustainable is also really, really interesting. Cheshire West, which is one of the 3 boroughs in my area, is, I think, measured by CO2 emissions, either the 3rd or 4th most polluting borough in the country. And it's all coming from from the SR oil refineries, CF fertilizers, and the area on the south bank of the Mersey on its own consumes 5% of the UK's energy every day. So surprise, surprise, it produces quite a lot of emissions to go with it. We know what we need to do to decarbonise that. We've got proposals in place. Some of that we need government help with, but we know what we need to do. If we achieve that decarbonisation, then we won't just be making a contribution towards the decarbonisation of Cheshire, Warrington, or just the Northwest, but actually measurable, sort of for the whole of the country. So sustainable is something we know how to do. Inclusive is more of a challenge, and I would be the first to accept that we have done less on inclusivity than perhaps we should have done over the years. And yeah, given current circumstances, you won't be surprised that we've included, wanted to be really, really healthy in that list as well. So we have a vision about where we think we want to be and where we want to go. The trick now is to get from where we are now, which is businesses starting to come back to life. Although some interesting challenges around there. We, like everybody else, I've already mentioned, will need to deal with the spike in unemployment that is quite literally just around the corner. I hope that we can sort that in a couple of years, but I don't know, and we'll have to see whether we get sort of further lockdowns and so on and so forth. And then it's how we get back on course to that, to that brighter future. And let's say, as I describe it, it's back on course. But it's a course adjustment rather than anything sort of fundamentally different. So absolutely, we've got some challenges, and just throw one more challenge in, and I'll sort of give you an opportunity to get a word in edgeways. But I was struck this morning. The retail stats are out for June. The headline says that retail sales are back at their pre-COVID levels. The difference, however, is the amount that is going online is 50% higher than it was pre-lockdown. Consequence of that is, I think, trade going through physical shops is 15% lower. And I think the worry has to be that, it was June, lockdown didn't start to finish until mid-June. That might adjust a bit, but there are some messages there, unfortunately, about the long-term prognosis for the high street, which we probably already knew, but things have been accelerated. And we are, and we, like everywhere else, is going to have to tackle that problem, tackle that challenge as well.
Yeah, some really interesting points that you make there, Philip, and again, very pertinent, I think, to say some of the changes we were thinking about anyway, but we're going to have to accelerate them. And in some respects, that will just provide some opportunity. And I think that's important to recognise. There will be some positives out of this awful situation. I think one of the other interesting things, though, is the point you made there about Cheshire and Warrington being seen as largely a place of full employment. And when you think of Cheshire and Warrington, you think of economic growth, you think of quite a wealthy county. And therefore, some of the challenges that perhaps are associated with much of the north are not necessarily things that you would associate with Cheshire and Warrington. So that point that you made, one of the final points that you made in terms of inclusive growth, is probably something that you're going to have to prioritize, as you say, more so than may have been the case prior to that. But can I just put this point to you as well, Philip? I think one of the things that our core cities in particular have often struggled with is the provision of high quality jobs. And again, if I may say so, Cheshire and Warrington has that reputation of good, high quality, professional, innovative industry sector jobs. In terms of trying to get that balance right between inclusive growth, providing people with job opportunities, but maintaining that high level reputation of good jobs, good employment, high wage, that's going to be quite difficult, isn't it, as we move forward? And I'm guessing that for LEPs, training, skills, education, those areas are going to be something that you're really interested in getting stuck into.
Absolutely. And indeed, there are a lot of strengths in Cheshire Warrington, but kind of our local industrial strategy, which unfortunately never got formally published before lockdown, did identify that actually Cheshire Warrington faces its challenges. One of the, and to some extent, we have a slightly bipolar kind of economy, in that we have about 20% of our working population working in incredibly high productivity and therefore high wage sectors, advanced manufacturing, life sciences, energy sector. We also have probably the remaining 80% working in much lower productivity, therefore much lower wage sectors. And the consequence of that, very, very surprisingly, is that a higher proportion of our working population pre-COVID were earning below the real living wage than was the case in Manchester. Right. And that's one of the reasons why inclusivity is so important. It's also the case that you're absolutely right that a combination of that etc. And I think kind of manufacturing average productivity per person in the manufacturing sector was £169,000. That's just each person who goes to work every day is producing kind of £170,000 a year each, and that was the average across 20% of our working population. So that kind of really pulls the average for Cheshire Warrington right up to the point where yes, productivity per hour was about I think last year for which we got data, which must be about 2017, productivity per hour was something like 4% above the national average, and we run about only 3 or 4 areas in the country that was above the national average. But the gap between the rest of the UK and Cheshire and Warrington was getting narrower, and had those trends continued, we would have become a low productivity economy. But in other words, we would have had lower productivity in the UK in about 3 or 4 years time. So we were already thinking really, really hard about how we raise kind of the skill levels of our population. How interestingly we encourage some of our kind of 18-year-olds and indeed 21-year-olds to either stay or go off to university and come back. We have a very, very small proportion of young graduates, certainly compared to Manchester and to Liverpool. And what that was tending to do was it was tending to discourage kind of higher skill kind of companies that sort of to come to Cheshire and Warrington. The first question that any company thinking about expanding or relocating into Cheshire and Warrington would ask is, right, where am I going to get my staff from? Where is that pool of skilled labour? And the truth was, we could offer you, come and ask me for a 50-year-old, highly qualified, highly experienced manager, and I'll form an extremely long queue outside your door. Ask me for a 25-year-old kind of with a master's qualification, sort of experienced lab technician, much harder to get hold of. So we were thinking really hard about that, and we've got one of the things that's led to is a program called Accelerate, a £30 million program, which is about raising the skills levels of existing employees. So, and with particular concentration on digital skills. So they come to us. It's the employer that specifies the course that they want their employees to do, and it doesn't have to be one that's come off the shelf. They can come along and write their own curriculum. We find a provider to lay on that course. We pay 40% of the cost of that. They pay 60%. Hopefully, what we get at the end of that is someone with a much higher skill level, particularly around digital. Doing quite a lot with something called the Pledge, engaging with 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds to get them to understand the great opportunities that are available within Cheshire Warrington. In other words, please stay. Trying to kind of move them towards STEM, and then also what we were doing is also thinking about how we attract kind of some of those skilled graduates from elsewhere in the country, and maybe even from abroad. We had such a sort of dearth of them, and all of this to address the trend where, again, pre-lockdown, we were in the incredibly fortunate position of creating jobs faster than twice as fast as the population was growing, but many of those jobs being in relatively low wage occupations, and actually many of those jobs then being filled by people who were travelling in from North Wales, from Staffordshire, from parts of Merseyside, even parts of Manchester as well, because that image of Cheshire as kind of the northwest equivalent of Surrey, with Manchester being actually isn't true. Actually, we were a net importer of labour every morning. About a third of our workforce was travelling in from elsewhere, and actually we were sending fewer people out to the Manchesters, the Liverpools, and this world than they were sending into to us. But unfortunately, and very interestingly, a statistically significant difference between the average wages of people who live and work in Cheshire Warrington and the people who live outside of Cheshire Warrington and work in the area, with the latter being actually significantly lower than the former.
Okay, interesting, because perceptions can often be wrong, and
Absolutely.
The statistics that you've just offered there, Philip, give me a different impression of Cheshire and Warrington than I had previously. I think I always have associated the county with, as I say, being quite a wealthy area, and also, a world leader in many respects, in things like science, technology, and health. And I'm sure that is the case, but as you rightly say, that actually accounts for a relatively small percentage of the population. So some big challenges ahead for you. And of course, like all great places, your visitor economy has had plenty to offer in the past. And we all know the challenges and the difficulties that those people and the places that do provide hospitality services and those facilities face in the future. Any thought being given to that? Of course, one of the more high-profile cases was Chester Zoo.
Yeah.
Now they managed to, fortunately raise a fair few bob through a public appeal, and that was good to see. But nevertheless, we've got Chester Racecourse, we've got some fabulous restaurants, we've got castles, we've got lots of different attractions across Cheshire. So, as I say, any sort of conversations happening around that sector?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the things that we did a couple of years ago, which kind of with every passing day kind of looks like a better and better and better decision, was that we made the decision to make Marketing Cheshire part of the local enterprise partnership. It was completely separate, and what that now has given us is the ability to work much more closely with the retail, the hospitality, the visitor economy, and combine. Previous guys on its own independently, Marketing Cheshire would simply have done the marketing for Cheshire and Warrington as a sort of visitor destination. What we're now able to do is get Marketing Cheshire not only to do the marketing, but also provide the leadership that sector needs to sort of come back out of the crisis. So we are working really, really closely with that sector on initially getting the messages out that Cheshire Warrington is a safe place to come back to, and working with those businesses to make sure that it genuinely is safe. Hopefully we'll get to the place where people are much more confident about going to places, and we can begin to turn the volume up. Visit Britain are, I think, going to give a number of, probably actually over the whole of the country, some money to destination management organisations, as they're called in the trade, tourist boards to you and me. And they'll be giving some money to kind of run some campaigns for August, which will encourage people to come back. The LEP itself is working on some ideas that might provide a little bit of financial assistance. But then what we're also doing is providing, advice and guidance, and actually running sort of webinars and seminars ourselves, just to kind of, exchange good ideas and best practice, and also wanting to perhaps again hasten something that we were already thinking about, which was raising the productivity of that sector. Some of those people earning below that real living wage are people working in the visitor economy, and if we can make those businesses more successful, more profitable, more productive, then hopefully what that will do is that will help to sort of raise the income levels of the people in that sector. And and trying to have it back to that sort of that digital thing. A small example. Cheshire has a number of farms that sell ice cream. It's sort of Cheshire Farm being the most famous, but there are others. You can sell ice cream by having a very long queue of people kind of waiting at a counter, getting to the counter, looking along kind of 25 different flavors, and having your 5-year-old spend ages choosing what they want. Alternatively, and this is at least one of the farms has done, you can have those boards that those who've been to McDonald's have seen, and probably some of the other takeaways. You go, press all the buttons, make your selection, and then sort of wait for your number to be called. You need digital skills in order to do that, but it raises the number of people you can get through. Lessens the queues, therefore makes it more likely that people will, how many people have sort of seen the long queue and have told their kids, no, wait, we'll come back later, or we won't come back at all. And it's all those sorts of innovations, and using this as an opportunity maybe to get hotels to sort of do a bit of comparing notes and exchanging ideas that they wouldn't have done before. And then of course the other innovation, and we'll have to see whether whether COVID creates the cafe culture that we all moan and groan that we haven't got normally after beat Spain or somewhere. Of course, in order to sort of raise the capacity for of certainly those sit-down restaurants and sit-down cafes, local authorities were already allowing them to spill out into the street, and kind of turning a deliberate blind eye to sort of whatever the regulations were saying. And I think actually the government may have loosened the regulations anyway. But again, innovations there as well, and who knows? Let's see whether that's also sort of is something that ultimately remains a kind of a more permanent feature. But it's those sorts of having those seminars, having those webinars, getting the getting people exchanging notes, and then, as I say, kind of the lab working on some ideas about how we might be able to sort of provide a little bit of financial assistance to sort of help them sort of make some of those changes.
Now, we've been talking about some of the difficulties, and as I say, many of them not foresaw. But nonetheless, despite all of these things happening, we've got some positives to talk about as well. And I think it's been good that the government have basically recommitted to high-speed rail and some of the infrastructure projects that we were all looking forward to, all supportive of. And I think some of us half feared that there may be an announcement coming down the track, if you forgive the pun, that money might not be available. As I say, all the messaging coming out from Whitehall appears to be, no, it's full steam ahead on all that sort of stuff. Now, of course, Cheshire and Warrington is a big hub for that network. And so, as much as we do face some difficulties, as you've well outlined, Philip, there are those opportunities coming along as well. What are the sort of things that you're hoping Cheshire Warrington can benefit from those new infrastructure investments?
Right. Well, yeah, and you're right. I mean, I too feared HS2. It's a very, very big project. The Chancellor's just spent a lot of money on other stuff. Could he afford it? But no, very, very clear messages coming back from government that no, absolutely committed to HS2. They are still engaging in the review of the Northern Rail network to sort of make sure that we make the best of HS2 for the whole of the north, and certainly the whole of the northwest. So that's extraordinarily welcome. HS2 is a huge, huge opportunity for Cheshire and Warrington. Obviously, it starts at Crewe, and I think really two things about Crewe. One is aiming to make it a genuine hub, and I'll come back to sort of what that means in a second. And a genuine hub for the benefit of Cheshire, North Wales, but also the southern half of the northwest in rail, but also other transport terms as well. And then leveraging off that, creating a growth corridor, as we are describing it, in sort of starting in Crewe, but going up the up sort of parallel to the sort of HS2 route, and into Winsford and into Middlewich, with Winsford being the sort of the location of the HS2 depot. And it's a conversation we are still having with government, but what we hope we will be able to persuade them is that we should have enterprise zone style powers. So if we are prepared to invest in helping development to happen on sites close to Crewe, and as I happen to Winsford and Middlewich as well, then we will get to retain the business rate income from there for a period of 25 years or so. Partly to repay, we will have to invest. We will have had to have borrowed in order to invest in that infrastructure and those buildings. So the first thing we'll have to do is we'll have to repay those loans. I suspect that we may well be told by government, if they're going to allow us to do that, we may have to take some of that income and put it into the new station that we would like to see at Crewe. And I'm sure many people on this webinar, watching this webinar, will be aware the government takes the view that if you want new stations, you have to pay for the local areas, have to pay for them themselves. So we'll have that discussion with government. And then if I come back to the station, Crewe as a station, its building and its facilities are life expired. In fact, I think it is still exercising a dispensation it's got from the Disability Discrimination Act on the grounds that it hasn't had any serious development since that act was passed, and therefore I think unless you actually undertake that development, you don't need to comply, which may tell you something about just how old some of that stuff is. So, so we are saying to government, look, if you are going to bring trains up from London and get them up to Crewe in 55 minutes, up from Birmingham in half an hour, and Manchester Airport and so on and so forth, we're really after two things. One, is a decent quality station, which not only feels as if you've actually arrived in Cheshire. But much more importantly, is a pleasant and easy environment to get around. And then, because the justification for having Crewe as a hub on HS2 is there are about, I think it's 6 different railway lines that converge on Crewe, railway lines out into Shropshire and down to Wales, obviously to North Cheshire, Chester, North Wales, obviously up kind of towards Manchester, but sort of sandbanks going up towards Stockport, down to Stoke-on-Trent, up towards Liverpool, and then the main West Coast, the existing main West Coast main line up to Warrington. We've said to government we want a really good set of services, so that when somebody's arrived, from London in 55 minutes, they don't find themselves standing on a depressing, old, dingy station, being told, "Terribly sorry, you just missed the next train to Chester or to wherever. But don't worry, there'll be another one along in 59 minutes." You know, what we are after is what we would describe as a turn up and go service, and consumer behaviour, passenger behaviour suggests that if trains kind of, if the gap between trains is about 20 minutes or less, then passengers stop worrying about the timetable. With that type of frequency of train, you're arriving up from London, on average, your next train to Chester or down to Shrewsbury or up into Liverpool is 10 minutes away. And if you've got decent refreshment facilities and you have just missed the last one and it's 19 minutes you've got to wait, then it's a comfortable, pleasant station to move around in. So that's good quality station, which we think it's not only essential from that perspective, but frankly, if they don't do it, then shortly after building HS2, I suspect that actually part of that station is going to start falling down. It is that old. There are trees growing out of some of the supporting pillars in Crewe Station. And I do mean trees. I don't just mean weeds or a bit of moss. I do mean full-size trees, which I'm sure shouldn't be there. So let's do the station up now while we've got the opportunity. The station is going to have to close for several weeks, probably in 2024. So let's do the work then. Get a decent quality station, and then crucially have a good set of services, because that way someone as far out as Holyhead can feel that HS2 is a bit of benefit to them. If we don't give them that quality of service, then with some legitimacy, most people who won't be travelling on a fast train down to London, most people are going to think that that's £50 billion and it's done absolutely nothing for me. And then really just kind of, in a sense of kind of the point I was going to go on and make about kind of the rest of the area, really picked up by that, having really good connections to that station. But then also Warrington as well, with our other aspiration being Warrington to become the hub that sort of links HS2 to the Northern Powerhouse rail, and putting Warrington pretty much in a similar position to Crewe, and that's an extra few years away, but I think is also an aspiration that is important to us, and all of that put alongside stuff that we should be doing that makes Crewe, Warrington, Chester, the rest of our sub-region a great place to do business, and that ultimately is to the benefit of absolutely everybody. Get somebody to the position where they're saying, I can live more cheaply, I can live more pleasantly, I can get the skilled people I need, I can get great facilities, I get great support from the LEP and the local authorities, and I can get to London in 55 minutes when I want to get there, which is probably less time than it takes me to travel from, I don't know, Wimbledon to, I don't know, Leicester Square. Stick yourself in Cheshire. What's not to like?
So.
I'll mark you down to move down from Liverpool, Frank.
And I think sticking with the positivity, Philip, if you look at the Northern Powerhouse and Cheshire's place within it, two things I think that we're looking ahead to, really. One is the fact that working collaboration with Manchester, Liverpool, that science and tech offer that Cheshire has can become a really powerful asset for the whole of the North. And, you know, comparisons are now being made, aren't they, between what we've got to offer here and the Golden Triangle. And whereas R&D investment has often just automatically almost been assumed to be going to Oxford and Cambridge, we can actually really start to compete for that money now, and rightly so, and hopefully do better things with it as well. So there's that aspect. And the other thing I wanted to just touch upon in terms of perhaps developing those collaborative approaches is the fact that Cheshire has been involved recently, before lockdown, in trying to formulate a devolution deal, a combined authority, a governance model, which will, again, attract additional investment from government. So I wondered if you could just talk about those two opportunities as well.
Yeah, okay, well, let's start with the science stuff, because you're absolutely right. You know, we have developed an incredibly kind of vibrant sort of life sciences hub at Audley Park. But that sits alongside and in partnership with, you know, a similar sort of hub in South Manchester, and some real strengths in the sort of the Liverpool science community. If I was being brutally honest, I don't think we've made as much of that as you know. I've had several conversations with colleagues in Manchester and with Liverpool, and we always tell ourselves we really should do something about jointly marketing that, jointly developing it, and we've not done as much as we should do. Similarly, in the energy sector, where I think actually the cooperation is somewhat better. We've got a huge amount to, you know, we've got hydrogen production already. We've got the salt caverns where you can store that hydrogen. We've got kind of people who've got really sophisticated proposals for really smart energy networks that ensure that the energy you're using off the grid at any one time is always both the cleanest and the cheapest, and instantaneously switching sort of between. And that being done in sort of close cooperation with colleagues in Liverpool, obviously HyNet being which is the hydrogen network which straddles kind of sort of Cheshire and Warrington, and also Liverpool, but also into Manchester. But then also use of hydrogen for transport, which is something that Liverpool's very interested in, and then also not forget tidal energy, and of course that huge great wind farm out in Liverpool Bay. So there's some huge strengths there, and I think there is more that we can do to push that. We have certainly been trying to encourage the comparisons with the Golden Triangle, but we can go further, and I'm hoping that very shortly we'll be able to announce another big investment into Audley Park. And then the next thing in the offering is a development partner for the Thornton Science Park in Ellesmere Port, which of course is the old Shell kind of research and development HQ. So there's a lot to the going for us, and a lot that we're already doing with colleagues in Manchester and Liverpool. There's a lot more that we could do, and let's also not forget, you know, Cheshire and Warrington is also you know, part of the MP11, the 11 Northern Powerhouse LEPs. And let's not forget that, you know, in terms of clean energy, you've got that, you know, we've got a nuclear engineering powerhouse in Warrington ourselves, but then you've got another really strong hub in Cumbria. You've got over in Teesside and Tees Valley, an area that is just as advanced in carbon capture technology and indeed hydrogen technology as we are. So there's a huge amount that we can do to work together, not just in the northwest, but also with our northern partners. And really segueing into devolution, if we had a devolution deal like Liverpool and Manchester have got, we have much greater flexibility to make some of those things happen. You know, at the moment we are having to go constantly cap in hand to the government. We've had a couple of instances recently, sort of during COVID, where I won't go into detail, but where we've said, "Oh, look, there's something we'd like to do, and we've got the cash over here, and it's fine." And government sort of said, "Oh, terribly sorry, you know, you're not a combined authority, and therefore you can't do that." You know, so we want to kind of break out of that. Now, government keeps saying it's going to publish a white paper on devolution recovery in September, so we'll have to look and see what that says. I think what's important, and I think the kind of the test on that is whether or not what government is offering is sufficient funding and sufficient powers and sufficient flexibility to ultimately persuade our local authority leaders that is something they should go for. The price that everybody has to pay for devolution is a mare. I'm going to avoid commenting on the kind of on the success or otherwise of either of the mayors. That would just way too political. But what I can say with certainty is, you know, colleagues in Manchester were reluctant to have a mayor before their devolution. Colleagues in Liverpool did so, and you could understand why. You know, local authority leaders in our area are kind of saying, well, you know, what is it a mayor brings that we couldn't do? You know, those three local authority leaders already work really well together. They work really well with us. So the offer on the table has got to be pretty good, I think, and I think that is important. But you know, the opportunities to, you know, for example, you know, that Accelerate program I talked about. We have built that around European money. The amount of money it is costing us, it's about the same amount as the government spends on adult skills in Cheshire and Warrington. Now, if we had devolution, Liverpool and Manchester have both got control over their own adult skills budgets, and therefore would be able to say that Accelerate, whatever it is that they are choosing to spend the money, Accelerate, when the money's run out. At the moment, that program closes. We get 19,000 learners through the program, and the 19,001st person gets told, "Sorry, money's out. No more where that came from." We had control over the adult skills budget. We could put that program in place in perpetuity, or for as long as it seemed to meet sort of the needs of our area. And I think that's you know, getting some of those powers is, you know, potentially hugely important to kind of, you know, to give us the flexibility to address our problems. And I think, you know, that's the other thing that COVID has done. COVID, you know, it's been a bit of a guided missile on some parts of the economy. Some parts of the economy have not done too bad. In fact, some parts of the economy have absolutely thrived. You know, I'm sure we all noticed the announcement earlier in the week that Hermes wants to take on 9,500 people. You know, and I was quite struck by the symmetry. The very same day, Marks and Spencer's announced they were making 950 redundant. But there have been some parts of the economy that have been really badly hit. Now, those parts of the economy are, you know, they are bigger in some areas than in others. And the current, you know, one-size-fits-all approach from government doesn't seem to recognise that, you know, Chester has got a big visitor economy. Chester will be affected differently to, say, Macclesfield, where the visitor economy is that much smaller. You know, similarly, you know, coastal Lancashire will have been very badly hit. Parts of the city of London, apart from them all having to work at home, probably barely noticed that anything has happened. And you know, I think COVID has underlined the importance of getting that flexibility. I think the other point that we're waiting for, and the other thing that we're waiting for in the from the Northern Growth Body, for the white paper, is actually a bit of clarity about this Northern Growth Body. Government committed nearly 12 months ago that it was going to set up this Northern Growth Body. We need to understand what that Northern Growth Body is going to do, how it's going to work. I think that's really, that clarity is also really, really important. And I think what I would say from a Northern Growth Body perspective is that, yeah, the MP11 has shown that there really are things, for example, trade and investment, funny enough, actually, some of the clean energy stuff that can be done more effectively and for a greater benefit for the North as a whole if it is done at the Northern level. So very, very happy for the Northern Growth Body to take responsibility for some of those. Let's not have the Northern Growth Body interfering in things that are done most effectively, more locally, which, local transport, local skills, as I've touched on. So we need some clarity about that from the white paper as well.
Just conscious that we're coming towards the end of our conversation this afternoon. If there's anybody tuning in who wishes to ask a question of Philip, please type it into the chat room. There's a little box at the bottom of your screen that you can do that, and I'm sure we'll be happy to take them. Just bear in mind it's Friday afternoon. We don't want anything too challenging or tasking for us at this stage. Just sticking with devolution for a second, Philip, and I think we would all take the point that you make there. Is the price worth the prize, in a sense, or the other way around perhaps? But I think when I'm listening to the announcements that are being made, particularly by the Chancellor, I think there's, to be fair to him, an awful lot of good stuff in that. So, lots of money that's being made available. Lots of potential initiatives that we can see potentially at least making a difference. My fear is that we will have that one-size-fits-all approach that you mentioned. And for me, the significance of what he's announced will all be in the delivery. So that means devolved powers, decentralisation. It means getting that money to local enterprise partnerships, to growth hubs within those localities, so that we can actually start to map out what matters and what makes a difference in our areas best. And for me, this is a debate that I've been long involved in. I'm a big believer, big advocate of decentralisation. And again, whether our politicians like it or not, I'm afraid, what governments want to see is a safe structure from their perception where they can give that money and there is still some legitimacy in terms of accountability and clarity of who's spending that money and who's taking responsibility. So, it's an important discussion that's taking place. I know often businesses say to me, why do you get carried away with all this structural stuff? We just want the cash. And I get that. But actually, that governance structure, that governance model is going to be, in my opinion, increasingly important. And final point before I shut up, Philip, is that when you have powerful figureheads like Andy Burnham, Steve Rotherham, it can often make a difference because they've got direct access to some very senior politicians. So as I say, it may be something that businesses feel isn't necessarily applicable to them, but I think it is an important discussion that is happening.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think actually where business would come from is what they want is what's best for the economy. And there's no question that they have spotted the fact that Andy Burnham, Steve Rotherham get far more airtime, far more visibility than the local council leaders do in Cheshire, Warrington. Indeed, to be fair, the council leaders themselves recognise that. The business test will always be what's best for business. And actually, they do get interested in those sort of institutional and structural discussions when they can see that it's got some benefits. And I think I think the kind of the deals that were available to, in the rounds of devolution that Liverpool and Manchester kind of took advantage of, which, amongst others, gave them, £900 million investment pots and so on and so forth. If that were on the table for Cheshire and Warrington, then, I could imagine leaders probably saying, well, okay, yeah, we'll kind of, we'll go for that. We can see that there are real benefits. And, yeah, but I think we have to see, one of the things that has slightly hampered the debate, and we've been on the verge of devolution 2 or 3 times, but government seems very reluctant to put its cards on the table and to say this is what is on offer. If you have a mayor, they almost seem to want to get you to the point where you have committed to having the mayor before they're telling you what you're going to get for it. And yeah, I mean, kind of, yeah, we kind of, we all know that you don't play all of your cards before the other side has played some of theirs, I think. So we need to, and maybe that will come through. Maybe that will come through in the white paper, and we'll have to obviously see what happens there, I think.
I mean, what I'm seeing, and we were involved in some regards in terms of the devolution deal that's just taken place in West Yorkshire. I say involved, we were very close to watching how the discussions developed. And you will be aware that Yorkshire has had many iterations of what devolution might look like for the county. And so for me, listen, we have lots of public and private spats within our local authorities across the Northwest. You ain't seen nothing until you've been to Yorkshire. So if you can get a deal done in West Yorkshire, you can get a deal done anywhere, I promise you. Listen, I asked people to pop questions into the chat room. Nobody's bitten yet. Last couple of minutes, last call for questions. We may have stunned you into silence. We may, or Philip may well have answered any of the questions that you were going to put. But the one area that has almost gone off the agenda, but clearly isn't, and is still very much exercising the minds of many of our businesses, particularly exporters, is the B word. And we've managed to go 53 minutes without mentioning it yet, Philip. I think that's a record for one of our conversations. Again, there will be many businesses, I know, in Cheshire and Warrington who are anxiously waiting for some clarity and guidance around what Brexit may look like. You can never tell with these negotiations whether it's going to be no deal or whether something is going to emerge. But again, any advice, guidance coming from the local enterprise partnership into what businesses should be thinking about at the moment?
Yes, I mean, obviously we were heavily involved. Is it twice now so far that we've kind of got to the verge of leaving or not leaving, as the case may be, with our growth hub heavily involved in getting messages out to business about what they need to do to prepare, and we're starting to gear up to do that again. The challenge that we find is that lack of certainty. I've had many businesses say to me, particularly when we were looking down the barrel of a really serious kind of crash out of the EU, around about Christmas, last Christmas, many businesses saying that would be really bad, but what's worse is the not knowing.
Yeah.
If I know what I've got to deal with, I'll deal with it, and if that's a no deal crash out, I'll deal with it. But not knowing is incredibly debilitating. I don't know whether to invest in this piece of equipment over here, or invest in a kind of an office in Luxembourg, or whatever it is that I need to do. I need that certainty, and I think that's going to be the message that we'll start to get again. Tell me what I've got to do, and I'll do it, and it will be fine. I notice the government has begun to start its advertising campaign encouraging people to prepare, but prepare for what? And that's the problem. Our former chair, Christine Gaskell, used to say that most small businesses are too busy starving to feed themselves. And that's a brilliant example. If what you're saying is to a business. I wonder whether this analogy will stretch this far, but if you're saying that there are multiple different plates of food, but you can only have one of them, and once you've made the decision about which one to get, that's it. You've spent all the money that you've got, and that. But you can kind of see where I'm going with this. Businesses need to know what is, and that's the main message. And I think the government, I notice, is now talking about October. It really needs to kind of stick to that. And businesses do not want to. I mean, yes, you could invest in all the things that you need to do that are necessary to sort of cope with a sort of no deal crash out. But given that you've probably used up any reserves that you had sort of during COVID, to be told at the end of that process, actually we've done a deal, and now you must go and sort of spend all that money again on preparing for something rather different from what you had prepared for. It's not going to work. It's going to create massive problems. The government really does need to tell us what the deal is. Let business prepare. If there is a deal, but just tell us one way or the other. Let businesses prepare.
Yeah, great points. I've spoken to a number of politicians from both sides recently and said exactly that, Philip, that this idea that Brussels negotiations always go down to the wire and somebody will blink at the last minute. It's the last thing businesses want to hear, because, as you say, we've got to have time to prepare. And I think if COVID has proved anything, it's that actually the bigger the business, the more difficult it can be sometimes for them to be nimble and to pivot and to change direction in the way that they may need to if that Brexit deal looks like either, as you say, a crash out or something different. The sooner we know, the better. Listen, it's been great chatting to you today. I think, as I say, it's been a wide-ranging discussion. We've not had any questions in the chat room, I think, because, as I say, you've covered things in a very comprehensive fashion, Philip, for which I'm very grateful. We would love to get you along to a face-to-face live event in Cheshire in the not-too-distant future. I hope you'll join us at some stage.
I will do. Yeah, I will look forward to that. It's been great chatting to you as well. And let's hope that we can meet sort of live and kind of talk to real people rather than over the virtual airwaves.
Yeah, one of those fantastic hospitality venues we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely.
Have a great weekend, Philip, and thanks very much for your time.
All right, cheers then. Cheers. Bye-bye.